Welcome. Suffering is such a big topic. There are so many stories and theories to try to explain why humans experience suffering. So in this video, I'm going to speak about how I approach suffering on this Magdalene path that I walk. So welcome if you're new. I am Bronya, and I talk a lot about the teachings in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene from a spiritual perspective, not a religious perspective, and how we can work with those teachings in our everyday lives to help us and to improve our lives. In this video, I'm going to talk about the different stories that we have around suffering, including things like karmic bonds, soul contracts, etc. And I'm going to talk about how those kinds of beliefs, the beliefs we hold around suffering, can actually affect the suffering that we're going through. And I'm also going to talk about different types of suffering that we might experience. And I think it's important to talk about the different types of suffering that we might experience, because some of them mean that we do have some responsibility to take, some of them mean that we absolutely don't, and some of them might be a little bit more difficult to figure out what's going on. So I think everyone, whether or not they're on a spiritual path, asks the question, why am I suffering? What did I do to deserve this? When will it end? And what I hope to do in this video is give you a different way to approach suffering, some different questions to ask that can help you. So the kinds of suffering I'm going to look at today are the types where we cannot objectively look outside of ourselves and say, that person caused my suffering, or that group caused my suffering. And we can't look at ourselves and say, yeah, I can see something I did or didn't do, or something I said that caused this suffering and that perpetuates this suffering. So this is like being a victim of a natural disaster, okay? Like a hurricane, a wildfire, something like that. Or being born with a mental or physical health condition, or both, that cause you lots of suffering throughout your life. We can't look outwardly and say, that was your fault, or look at ourselves and say, this was my fault. Practically right now on this earth, I did something to cause that suffering. We can't make that connection. Then we have the kind of suffering where we absolutely can look outwardly and say, yep, that person, that group, they are responsible for causing this suffering. So an example of this might be somebody runs a red light, they're on their phone, they're not paying attention when they're driving, they run a red light, they cause a collision that causes injury to maybe even themselves as well, multiple people maybe, and you can look and say, well, that person was being irresponsible. So here we can have a real world physical focus for our suffering. And then the other kinds of suffering, these are kind of similar, but we have where our situations in our lives, so work, relationships, health, things like that, health that, you know, we've not had our whole lives, but the outward situations are causing us trouble, they're causing us bother, they're causing us suffering. And we can look and say, my job is bad, my boss is bad, I don't get respected. And then we have the kind of suffering where it's maybe like one specific person, but it's cyclical. So it's like, it's always my friends, it's always friends I have, or friendship groups, it's always relationships, it's always at work, right? And maybe your other relationships, they tend to kind of go along okay, but there's specific cycles in your life with people. And all of these problems, so these four types of suffering that are either everyday or they're kind of like one-off big events, they can all be viewed either through a spiritual lens or a practical lens. So you can look at it and say, well, this is just something that happened. That person wasn't paying attention when they were driving and they caused a collision, and that's it. Or you can look at them and say, whoa, well, this must be some kind of karmic thing. You know, if all my relationships, these kinds of relationships, are always bad or difficult, maybe there's some kind of karmic bond. Or maybe all these bad things that happen, maybe I was bad in a past life, or maybe I signed a soul contract and I decided that I was going to go through all this suffering before I even came onto this planet, right? You can look at them in both of those ways. As you may have noticed, I am on a spiritual path, so I am open to these more spiritual explanations behind things that go on in life. However, The potential problem we can run into when we only ascribe a spiritual reason for our suffering is that we can stay stuck in that power of ignorance of the ego. So this is one of the powers that Mary Magdalene had to overcome, was her own ignorance. And when we say ignorance in this sense, we're not saying that you're like a stupid person or that you're a really horrible, awful person. We're just saying that you do not have your eyes open to the wider picture. And when we look at suffering through this purely spiritual lens, it can be really easy to just say, there's nothing that I can do about this. It's a test of God I just have to endure. Or I was bad in a past life and now I'm paying for it, so this is what my life is going to be like. Or, oh, well, I signed this contract, so this is just one of the things I have to experience. And we don't step back and look and say, is there somewhere that I could make changes that can improve my life as it goes on, so I don't keep getting into these cycles, so that I don't keep finding myself in the same kind of suffering situations. And this really applies to those types of suffering that are caused by our outward situations or by our relationships. And this is where we might even get stuck in cycles of going to healers constantly, or relying on, the kind of YouTube videos where it's like pick a card, or everything is going to work out fine, everything's coming to you. And we can just get stuck in like seeking reassurance but not really doing anything about it. So I want to talk first about the kinds of suffering that's to do with our everyday, like the nitty-gritty of our everyday lives. And then I will talk separately about the kinds of suffering that are, they seem like acts of God, or they're one-off big events in life where it's really easy for us to feel abandoned by the divine. It just seems senseless. We can't make sense of it, right? So if we take, for example, the person who is not happy at their job, maybe they're getting passed over for promotion and they think they absolutely deserve a promotion. But on this path that I walk, when it comes to suffering of this kind, I'm trying to be honest with myself, and I'm saying, do I have the skills? Do I actually have the skill, or do I need to put some work in on the side to skill up so that I can get this promotion? Or is it the case that actually it's just this company, it's just my boss, and I need to take the risk and make the bold move of finding a different job? And so even though I'm not the a-hole in this situation, I'm the one that's going to have to do work. I'm the one that's going to have to take a risk, because those people are not going to suddenly wake up and be like, oh, we're being really unfair, or if the situation is that I'm not being honest with myself in terms of, well, I don't really have the skills for this promotion, so I need to put in the extra work. And then if we take, for example, these cyclical type of relationships, and I want to talk just a little bit separately about the dangerous abusive relationships in a moment. For right now, I'm talking about the situations where we have, we're constantly being let down by people. Your partner doesn't support you. You're the family scapegoat, but it's not a kind of dangerous relationship. I'll touch on that in a moment. So in these relationships especially, it can be really difficult to deal with this suffering, because again, you are the conscious one. You are the one that is looking at life from a different vantage point and saying, how can I bring more consciousness to life? How can I look at where my shadows are? How can I improve myself? And perhaps the people around you are not doing that. And so again, this is where it's really difficult with this type of suffering, because you're the one that's going to have to do the work. You're the one that has to say, okay, am I putting boundaries in place? Do I know how to do that? Do I feel confident? Do I feel worthy of love, respect, and happiness? Do I know how worthy I am of those things? And if not, why not? And you're the one that has to do the work. And you could be like, well, why should I have to do it? But that's when you get stuck in these cycles, and it's this kind of, cutting your nose off to spite your own face kind of thing. It's denying yourself that elevation. It's denying yourself that better life, because you don't feel that it's fair, that you're the one that's going to have to learn how to put boundaries in place. You're going to have to rock the boat. You're going to have to let people down in their eyes. you're going to have to be the one to change things, even though really it would be really nice if those people who don't treat others nicely, if they did the work and made the change, but they're not going to do that. So you have to figure out, is it time for me to cut ties with people? Is it time for me to say, at a family meal, you always talk down to me and I'm not having it. Do not speak to me like that. And if they continue to do so, do you have to make the decision, I'm not going to these family meals. I'm not going to them. It's tempting to say to the other people, if you invite this person, I'm not coming. So you have to pick between us. But again, that's not fair on the other people who, again, you feel like should be standing up for you. But you have to decide, I'm not going to go. Or I'm going to host my own stuff and I'm just not going to invite them. I don't want them in my life. And it's going to cause some ruckus. And you have to just do that. So those kinds of suffering with those outward scenarios, they can be really difficult because we're not necessarily the ones that are causing suffering in our life, but we're the ones that have to do the work and make the changes. And we have to just accept that it doesn't feel fair. But you know what? I think this is going to lead me to something much better anyway. So I'm going to do it because I love myself. I know I'm worth more. I'm being honest with myself. I want better for myself and better from other people. I want relationships that uplift me. I want a workplace that respects me and appreciates me. And I'm going to go and find it. I'm going to bring it into my life. When it comes to seriously abusive relationships, that is a different area that needs to be dealt with very delicately, very carefully, and with professionals that are used to the mechanisms that are in play there. So this is not a call for you if you are in a dangerous situation to be like, right, well, I'm going to stick up for myself and I'm going to tell them, because we know that can be dangerous. So that is a different situation, and it is not something that I feel is fitting for me to address in a YouTube video, okay? There are organizations out there that can help you through those situations. They are there for you. They know, they understand there is no judgment. And those are the people that can help you. So does your suffering, when it comes to the everyday nitty-gritty of our lives, does your suffering call for some radical honesty and some really radical self-love to say, it doesn't feel like I'm the one that should have to do the work, but I think I am, and I'm going to have to do it? And what about that suffering where you're like, well, I don't think there's any work I have to do around being a victim of a natural disaster or of like a one-off life event that just kind of happened? This is where we lean in to our relationship with the divine. And I'm going to assume that if you have clicked on this video, you have some kind of relationship with the divine, or you would like some kind of relationship with the divine. And in these moments, it can feel like, I don't trust the divine. How can I trust when this has happened to me? And I want to kind of give an analogy here. So we all remember being children, outside playing, and you fall over and you graze your knee or the palm of your hand and it really hurts, and you run home to your mum, your dad, your gran, whoever, and you run in and you're like, oh, it hurts, I've fallen over, and they take you up. Depending on like the kind of upbringing you had, it might have been like, oh, come on, clean it off, get back out there. Or it might have been like, oh, come on, we'll clean it off, let's put a plaster on, have a hug, come on, out you go again. And you run out, you're encouraged to go back out and play as a child. And when you are that child, you don't turn round to your parent and say, why did you let me go outside and play where it's easy to get hurt? You just accept that nurturing and that healing. Because if your parent or your parental figure had said, no, you can't go out to play, it's too dangerous, you'd have been like, what? Oh, we were all there, right? We wanted to go out and play, and our parents were like, no, it's too late, it's too dark, it's whatever. And we didn't like that. And as adults, it's the same thing. If we were told, no, you can't go and get a job because it's too dangerous. You can't have a career, you can't make money, it's too dangerous. You can't go and have a romantic relationship, it's too dangerous. Your heart might get broken, right? If that's how the divine treated us, we wouldn't be happy. We would be like, I kind of want to make my own life. I want to go out there. I want to travel. I want to meet people. I want to try things. And the divine lets us do that. On this Magdalene path, this path that I walk, this path that I teach, this is how we see the divine. And something that I always think about is, if you look around, okay, we know we are loved. We know we are provided for, because the earth literally has everything we need to not only survive, but to really enjoy life. It's just the fact that humans have come along and commodified and commercialized everything. But this earth is so abundant and it gives freely to us, right? We have the means for food, for shelter, for water, things that we don't need but are really pleasurable, like flowers and fruits and sweet things and music and laughter and language, storytelling. These are all things that we were given. And so we know we're loved, we know we're provided for, because it's all there. But we have this will of our own where we want to go out and try things. And sometimes we get hurt. Sometimes we get hurt. And that's when we run home to the divine and we say, I got hurt. I need you to comfort me. And that's what the divine does. So whether somebody caused you harm directly or whether this harm came out of nowhere, this suffering, you can't turn back time and change it. All you can do is choose what to do in the present moment. How are you going to approach this suffering? And that's the question to ask, rather than why, when will it end? How am I going to approach this suffering? Is there work I need to do? Or do I need to lean back into the love of the divine to get me through this moment? Is it both? We stay rooted in the present moment and in love as much as we can. And we can look to the future to make plans, of course, like how am I going to improve my life? What's it going to be like? And we can learn from the past where it's appropriate, putting boundaries in place, cutting ties with people, learning when we're not open to, the fault being ours or the need that we need to do some work, right? But we don't live in the past. We live in the present and we live in love. This is a path of radical truth, radical self-responsibility, and immense love, bringing more love than you could ever imagine to every situation, whether it's having love for yourself, to be honest with yourself about the work you might need to do, or whether it's about accepting love from the divine and saying, I trust you, I know you want the best for me. It's a choice about how we approach our suffering. Do we let it take us to dark places where we fall into apathy and another power of the ego, which is zeal for death, that kind of apathy, that kind of giving up? Or do we say, I am going to bring more love to this situation that I could have imagined that I ever could before, and I'm going to stay in love and gratitude where I can, as much as I can, and move forward knowing that the divine is supporting me. And if you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this, I just want to read you something from Charles Kingsley, which is in my guidebook to the Victorian Romantic Tarot, which is a gorgeous tarot deck. Is man a mere mortal animal or an immortal soul? Is his flesh meant to serve his spirit, or his spirit his flesh? Is pleasure or virtue the end and aim of his existence? The hermits set themselves to answer that question, not by arguing or writing about it, but by the only way in which any question can be settled, by experiment. So I invite you to experiment with your view on suffering, your view on the divine. Try a different way. And this is something that it's an ongoing practice, It is really hard to fall into despair, but this is why we have, our relationship with the divine, and the teachings that I share are the things that help me stay centered in this understanding. And it's not always easy, and sometimes I fall into despair, but then I go back to the divine. And she holds me and she helps me through so that I can find the strength to be honest with myself, to do the work I need to do, or to simply endure if that is what I have to do at that time. So experiment, try. I hope that this has been illuminating for you. Thank you so much for being with me today. Many blessings.